We live in a world full of legends, and some legends have more influence over people and history than others. But how much weight can you put behind a legend? Can you pick apart the fact from fiction? And if not, does it even matter? Perhaps after this legend, you can be the judge. Welcome to the bi-weekly podcast that explores all that is myth, legend, and folklore in Scotland. Join me, Ryan, in discovering tales from Galloway to Shetland and from the Hebrides to Peterhead. This is Finding Folklore. The year was 832 AD, and the UK was not as we know it today. Scotland and England had not yet formed into nations. Scotland was ruled by the Picts in the east in what was known as Pictland, and the Scots in the west in what was known as Dalradia. Two indigenous cultures that had been opposed to one another, with recorded evidence showing the two cultures having battled on multiple occasions, with the first recorded instance of this being in 559 AD. It is likely their disputes predate this. However, records before this time are sparse. South of the border, England had not formed into a single nation either, with the northernmost English kingdom being Northumbria. Northumbria then covered much of what is now modern-day lowland Scotland, including the Scottish borders and much of the lowlands. Uniting against Northumbria, which was likely viewed as a common enemy, the Picts and the Scots came together under the rule of the Pictish king, King Angus, while the Northumbrians followed the rule of Athelstan. There is some dispute amongst historians as to whether Athelstan that ruled over the Northumbrian army was in fact King Athelstan, the first king of the English, and conqueror of Constantine II and the last remaining Viking kingdom on the British Isles. The dates, however, do not line up, as King Athelstan was not born until closer to the year 879 AD. It is therefore likely then that the Athelstan that led the Northumbrians was a different man, possibly a relative of the future king, possibly someone unconnected who just happened to share a name, or perhaps someone else entirely whose true name was being lost to history, and Athelstan was appointed post-mortem. King Angus had an idea that may have been to dissuade the Northumbrians from pressing north. They would send a great party to raid the Northumbrians' cattle. King Ecoli of the Scots sided with Angus so they could send south a small army in Northumbrian territory. The raid was a great success. In fact, an argument could be made that it was too successful. As the Scottish alliance marched their stolen cattle herd north, Athelstan fumed, determined to punish the invading Celts. He gathered his forces and gave chase. The Scots were slow with their bounty of stolen cattle, and soon the Northumbrians were hot on their heels. Angus hadn't planned for this. He had no time to retreat and couldn't face the larger Northumbrian army in open battle, so he looked for defensive grounds. He found them at Peffer Valley, near Markel, just outside the modern town of East Linton, on the east coast of Scotland. Angus set up camp for the night, sure that the Northumbrians would not march on them until morning. And then he sent out scouts. They returned with the news that he feared. The Northumbrian troop was 4 times larger than the Scots alliance. Sure they would fall the next day, Angus led his men in prayer. He prayed to all the saints that they aid his men in battle, help them stand victorious. And he vowed that if any saint answered his prayers, they would be made the patron saint of the united country of the Picts and the Scots. Later that night, he slept uneasily, when in his dreams, St. Andrew, who had been crucified on a diagonal cross, answered the king's prayers. St. Andrew told Angus that just before all hope was gone, he should look to the sky for a sign of imminent victory. The next morning, King Angus woke, roused and ready for battle. He gathered the Picts and the Scots and marched to meet the larger, technologically superior Northumbrian army. The battle started as you might expect. It did not go well for the Picts and the Scots. The Northumbrian forces overwhelmed the allies. Many Picts and Scots fell just as King Angus was ready to signal for a retreat. He looked to the sky and saw that St. Andrew had given him a sign. St. Andrew had used the clouds to paint a white diagonal cross against the blue background of the sky. Angus knew this was the sign St. Andrew had promised. With that, Angus rallied his troops, and to the astonishment of Athelstan, they managed to defeat the odds and turn the tide of the battle. Northumbrian bodies began to litter the battlefield. As Athelstan realised the day was lost, he called for a retreat, but King Angus, knowing that this was his chance, gave chase. Athelstan rode fast and hard, leaving men along the way to try and slow the charging Scots. But the Scots and the Picts kept on coming. They kept on gaining on the Northumbrian leader. Eventually, Athelstan knew there was no escaping, and so he made his final stand at a small river crossing. The Scottish alliance showed no mercy, and upon arrival, cut off the head of Athelstan on a site that is now known as Athelstan Ford. That is the story of how Scotland took the Saltire as its national flag, which today can proudly lay claim to be one of the oldest flags in the world, and why St. Andrew, a saint who by all accounts never set foot in Scotland in his life, became the patron saint of the nation almost 800 years after his death upon the diagonal cross. You can visit Athelstan Ford today, where behind the kirk is an old ducat that has been transformed into a heritage centre. Upon entering, it tells the tale of the battle that granted the village its name and Scotland its flag. Let me know in the comments how much of this tale you believe to be real. Was Athelstan King Athelstan the first king of England, or was he another ruler with the same name? Or was this story spun entirely to paint King Athelstan in a negative light and the Scots in a positive one? Like, share and subscribe if you haven't already, and join me in our next episode in 2 weeks' time. Until then, may the devil walk behind you. Bye for now.